Most species had learned this lesson through extinction. The survivors, the Veltaxis with their crystalline cities, the flowing Marcanti who danced between dimensions, the ancient Korth whose minds spanned millennia, had all discovered sanctuary on worlds that cradled them like protective mothers, gentle gravities, breathable atmospheres, predators that could be reasoned with or at least avoided. Then there were the humans. They came from Earth, a planet so impossibly hostile that the first Confederation survey team had classified it as Deathworld Class 12, unsuitable for intelligent life. The gravity crushed bones. The weather killed without warning. Every creature from the microscopic to the massive seemed designed by some cosmic sadist to end life as efficiently as possible. And yet they thrived. Captain James Riley stood at the observation deck of the UES Defiance, watching the swirling maelstrom of Cathmoran Prime grow larger in the viewport. His weathered hands, scarred from a childhood spent dodging Earth's endless catalog of death, gripped the railing with the casual strength that made other species uncomfortable. Behind him, the bridge buzzed with activity as his crew prepared for orbital insertion. "Captain," came the voice of Dr. Lisa Park, the expedition's xenobiologist. Her tone carried that particular mix of excitement and dread that had become humanity's signature emotional cocktail. "The preliminary scans are, well, they're exactly what we expected." Riley didn't turn around. He'd seen enough death worlds to know what was coming. "Let me guess. Hypercarnivorous ecosystem. Atmospheric pressure that would liquefy a Veltaxis. Weather patterns that could double as weapons of mass destruction. All of that," Park confirmed, moving to stand beside him. "Plus gravitational anomalies that defy current physics, indigenous flora that appears to be actively predatory, and electromagnetic storms that knocked out 3 of our probe satellites." Through the reinforced transperustil, Cathmoran Prime revealed itself in all its terrible glory. Storm systems the size of continents churned across its surface. Lightning, not the gentle variety that other worlds produced, but jagged scars of pure energy split the darkness with violent regularity. In the brief moments between strikes, they could glimpse a landscape that seemed to writhe and pulse with its own malevolent life. "Beautiful," Riley murmured, and meant it. Dr. Park shot him a look that was part amusement, part concern. "Sometimes I forget you people are completely insane." "Not insane," Riley corrected with a slight smile. "Adapted." The Defiance shuddered as they entered the planet's upper atmosphere. Warning klaxons began their familiar song, a sound that on any sensible ship crewed by any sensible species would signal immediate retreat. On a human vessel it was merely Tuesday. "Incoming transmission from Confederation Command," announced Communications Officer Torres, his voice barely audible over the growing atmospheric turbulence. It's Admiral Quintara herself, sir." Riley's smile faded. The Admiral was Veltaxis, one of the oldest and most respected beings in the Confederation. She didn't make personal calls to human captains unless something was seriously wrong. On screen, a holographic display flickered to life, revealing the ethereal form of Quintara. Her crystalline features, beautiful in the way that winter storms were beautiful, distant and perfect and utterly alien, were marked by something Riley had never seen before: fear. "Captain Riley," she began, her voice carrying harmonics that made human bones ache, "I trust your descent is proceeding according to your species' characteristically reckless parameters." "We're not dead yet, Admiral. I take that as a good sign." "Indeed." Quintara paused, and in that silence Riley heard the weight of unspoken secrets. "Captain, I must be direct with you. The Confederation Council has not been entirely forthcoming about the nature of your mission to Cathmoran Prime." The bridge fell silent except for the ship's groaning protest against the planet's assault. Riley felt that familiar cold settle in his stomach, the same sensation he'd experienced just before every major disaster of his career. "Go on. The planet is not uninhabited, as your briefing suggested." Quintara's image flickered as Cathmoran's electromagnetic fury interfered with the transmission. "There is a presence there, ancient, powerful, and according to our deepest archaeological records, wait." Dr. Park stepped forward. "Waiting for what?" for someone capable of surviving its trials. The Admiral's gaze shifted to focus directly on Riley. For someone from a Deathworld. Before Riley could respond, the Defiance was suddenly violently no longer falling. They hung suspended in the storm-racked sky, held aloft by forces that their instruments couldn't identify and their physics couldn't explain. Through the viewport, shapes began to emerge from the planetary surface structures that defied geometry, rising like impossible spears toward the ship. "Captain," Torres called out, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "I'm reading massive energy signatures from the surface. And sir, they're responding to our presence. They're turning toward us." Riley moved to his command chair with the fluid grace that came from a lifetime of expecting the universe to try to kill him. Around the bridge, his crew, all human, all veterans of worlds that lesser species couldn't even imagine, fell into the practiced rhythm of controlled chaos. "All stop," he ordered. "Maintain position." "Sir," Park said quietly. "We're not maintaining position. Something is maintaining it for us." Through the storm, the structures continued to rise. Not buildings, Riley realized with growing unease, but something else entirely, something that had been sleeping beneath the planet's tortured surface, waiting for the right visitors to arrive. The communication channel crackled back to life. Admiral Quinthera's image was fragmenting, her words coming through in broken waves of static and fear. "Ancient guardians told us they would know when the inheritors arrived. Captain, you must understand, the planet isn't just a death world, it's a test." The transmission died. In the silence that followed, broken only by the planet's endless fury, Dr. Park voiced what they were all thinking. A test for what? Before anyone could answer, the ship's sensors erupted in alarm. Something vast was rising from the deepest trench of Kathmoran Prime's largest continent. Something that had been waiting in the dark depths of an already impossible world. Something that had been waiting for humanity to find it. Riley gripped his command chair as the ship began to shake. Not from atmospheric turbulence, but from something far more fundamental. The fabric of space itself seemed to be rewriting the rules in the vicinity of Kathmoran Prime. "Captain," Torres called out, his voice now openly concerned. "Whatever's down there, it's trying to communicate. But sir, it's not using any known language. It's not using language at all." "Then what?" Riley's question was cut off as the bridge was suddenly impossibly filled with the sound of laughter. Not human laughter, not alien laughter. Either, at least, not from any species they knew. This was something else entirely. Ancient, amused, and absolutely terrifying in its intelligence. The laughter faded, replaced by a voice that spoke directly into their minds without bothering with the inconvenience of sound waves or translation protocols. "Welcome, children of the crucible world," it said, and there was humor in those mental words that made Riley's skin crawl. "We have been waiting so very long for someone adequate to arrive. The others, the soft ones, the careful ones, they disappoint us. They flee, they break, they die." The ship shuddered as invisible forces began to pull them toward the surface. "But you are different. You are forged in the fires of a world that should not permit life, yet does. You find humor in horror. You make jokes in the face of extinction." Riley realized, with dawning horror, what was happening. "You will be perfect for what comes next." As the Defiance descended toward the surface of Kathmoran Prime, no longer under their own power, Riley saw them clearly for the first time. The structures rising from the planet weren't ancient ruins or dormant guardians. They were amphitheaters. Massive, impossible amphitheaters carved from materials that shouldn't exist, filled with row upon row of empty seats that stretched toward the storm-torn sky, and at the center of each one a stage that pulsed with its own internal light. "Welcome," the ancient voice continued as the ship settled onto the surface of the primary amphitheater, with surprising gentleness, "to the arena of last resort. Here, the universe's greatest warriors have fallen. Here, its greatest minds have been broken." The voice paused, and in that pause Riley could hear the weight of eons. "But we have grown bored with mere combat. The bloodshed has become predictable. The screams lack creativity. So we have devised a new trial for the final inheritors of the galaxy." Riley stood slowly, understanding dawning on him with the inevitability of gravity. You will fight, yes. You will bleed, certainly. But more than that, you will entertain us. You will make us laugh even as you die. You will turn your final moments into performance. The ship's external cameras activated, showing them the amphitheater in all its impossible glory, and there in the front rows of seats that had been empty moments before sat beings that defied description. Ancient beyond measure, powerful beyond comprehension, and utterly, terrifyingly amused. Welcome to the Comedy Coliseum, humans. Your first performance begins now. The lights went out, and in the darkness of Kithmoran Prime, Captain James Riley heard his crew begin to laugh. Not with fear, but with the dark humor that had carried humanity through every impossible situation they'd ever faced. They were about to turn the universe's deadliest trial into the greatest show it had ever seen. The arena floor materialized around them like a fever dream given solid form. One moment, Captain Riley and his crew were standing in the familiar corridors of the UES Defiance. The next, they found themselves scattered across a vast circular stage that seemed to stretch beyond the horizon, its surface composed of some material that felt like metal, stone, and liquid starlight all at once. Above them, the amphitheater rose in impossible tiers, each level packed with beings that had witnessed the rise and fall of civilizations before Earth's sun had even begun to burn. Their forms defied easy description. Some appeared to be living crystals that sang with their own harmonics. Others seemed to be made of pure thought given temporary shape, and still others flickered between dimensions like cosmic mirages. But they all shared one thing: the expectant stillness of an audience waiting for the show to begin. Fascinating, came the ancient voice, now emanating from everywhere and nowhere. Most species, when first transported to the arena of last resort, spend their initial moments screaming, pleading, or attempting futile escape. But you... Riley looked around at his scattered crew. Dr. Park was examining the arena floor with scientific curiosity, already pulling out her portable scanner. Torres had his communications equipment out and was somehow trying to establish contact with the ship. Chief Engineer Rodriguez was actually grinning as he studied the impossible architecture surrounding them. You adapt. You assess. You joke. Well, Riley called out to his crew, his voice carrying easily across the vast space. I've had worse shore leave destinations. The sound of his words triggered something unexpected. A ripple of what might have been laughter from the ancient audience. Not mocking laughter, appreciative laughter. Rodriguez looked up from his examination of a nearby wall that seemed to be growing and reshaping itself. Hey, Captain, you think they validate parking here? More ripples from the stands. Dr. Park, without looking up from her scanner, added, I'm reading some interesting energy signatures here. Either this place runs on principles that violate half the laws of physics, or it's powered by pure pretension. The ripples became waves. The ancient beings in the stands were enjoying this. Remarkable, the voice continued, and now there was something that almost sounded like admiration in its mental tone. In the face of certain death, you make comedy. Death? Riley shrugged, a casual gesture that somehow carried across the vastness of the arena. You obviously haven't spent much time on Earth. We turned death into a hobby. A new voice joined the first, feminine if such concepts applied to beings this ancient, and crackling with what sounded like genuine amusement. Oh, Vrexthal, I think we may have found something special here. Indeed, Nick Sarah. But the trial must proceed. They must face the gauntlet of final despair, as have all who came before. The arena floor began to shift and change around them. Walls rose from nowhere, creating a maze-like structure that pulsed with its own malevolent energy. Creatures began to emerge from the shadows, beings that looked like they'd been designed by committee to represent every primal fear in the galactic unconscious. Riley watched a particularly impressive monster, all teeth, claws, and existential dread, materialize near Torres's position. Okay, crew. Looks like we're about to get busy. Remember your training? Which training would that be, sir? Torres asked, raising his sidearm. Standard combat protocols, or the How to Survive Impossible Alien Death Games seminar. The latter, obviously. We covered this in week 3. Dr. Park dodged a creature that seemed to be made of living nightmares and called out, I don't remember that seminar. That's because you were probably in the lab trying to dissect something that was still trying to eat you. Rodriguez replied, somehow managing to jury-rig a weapon from his engineering tools while running from what appeared to be a sentient tornado with anger management issues. The audience was no longer just rippling with amusement. They were actively laughing deep, resonant sounds that shook the very foundations of the arena. This is unprecedented. Rextedal's voice carried a note of confusion. They should be dying in terror, not whatever this is. Comedy. Through adversity, Riley explained, casually stepping aside as a creature the size of a small building tried to stomp on him. It's a human thing. The worse things get, the funnier we become. He turned to face the creature that had just tried to crush him, amalgamation of every predator that had ever stalked the nightmares of rational beings, and pointed accusingly at it. And you, sir, need to work on your timing. That stomp was at least 3 beats too slow for proper comedic effect. The creature paused, apparently thrown off its rhythm by what might have been the first constructive criticism it had received in eons. Dr. Park, now somehow hanging from a wall that was trying to dissolve her, shouted, "Captain, I'm getting some interesting readings here. These constructs aren't just random monsters. They're specifically designed to represent each species' greatest fears. And what are we supposed to be afraid of?" Torres asked, methodically shooting at something that looked like it had crawled out of a philosophy textbook's fever dream. "That's the problem," Park continued, managing to swing to a safer position. "They can't figure out what humans are supposed to be afraid of. Everything they've thrown at us so far is Tuesday afternoon by Earth standards." Rodriguez, who had somehow managed to weaponize the arena's own energy matrix, laughed. "Tuesday? This is more like a lazy Sunday back home." The ancient audience was now openly roaring with laughter. Some of the beings in the stands were apparently so amused they were changing colors or shapes or dimensions. Rextedal. Nixatera's voice carried clearly across the arena. "I believe we may have encountered our first technical malfunction in approximately 12 million years. Impossible. The gauntlet of final despair has never failed." Riley interrupted by addressing the arena directly. "Excuse me, Mr. Rextedal, was it? I think I see the problem here." The arena fell silent. In 12 million years of trials, no participant had ever addressed the operators directly. "You see," Riley continued, casually leaning against a wall that was trying to impale him, "your fear-based trial system is fundamentally flawed when it comes to humans. We're not afraid of death, we're afraid of boredom." Boredom? The concept seemed to ripple through the assembled ancient minds like a stone thrown into still water. "That's right, you want to terrify humans? Don't send us monsters. Send us an eternity of perfectly safe, perfectly predictable, perfectly pleasant existence, with nothing interesting ever happening again." Dr. Park, now somehow having managed to start taking tissue samples from one of the nightmare creatures, nodded enthusiastically. "He's right. This is actually the most fun I've had since we explored that dimension where mathematics was carnivorous. They find this entertaining." Rextedal's mental voice carried a note of what might have been panic. "More than entertaining," Torres added, having apparently figured out how to make his weapon fire jokes instead of bullets. "This is prime material. I'm already working on my stand-up routine about this place." The arena began to shift again, but this time the changes seemed uncertain, confused. The nightmare creatures began to look less terrifying and more concerned, as if they were actors who'd suddenly forgotten their lines. "The trial cannot end in entertainment," Rextedal declared, but there was desperation in the mental voice now. "The gauntlet of final despair must what?" Riley asked. "Must make us despair? Look around, Ancient One. Do you see any despair?" Rodriguez had somehow convinced one of the nightmare creatures to help him repair a piece of equipment. Dr. Park was conducting an impromptu field interview with another. Paraz was teaching a third how to do a proper comedic double-take. "This is not how the trial is supposed to proceed." "Maybe that's the point," Riley said quietly, and for the first time since they'd arrived, his voice carried no humor, just the weight of hard-won wisdom. "Maybe your trial is too narrow. Maybe survival isn't just about overcoming fear. Maybe it's about finding joy in the face of horror. Maybe the real test isn't whether we can die with dignity, but whether we can live with hope." The arena fell utterly silent. Then from the stands came a slow clap. Single, measured applause from one of the ancient beings. Then another joined in, then another. Within moments, the entire amphitheater was erupting in appreciation not just for entertainment but for something they hadn't seen in eons. A completely new way of looking at existence itself. Nixura, Rexthal's voice was quiet now, thoughtful. I believe we may need to reconsider the parameters of our trial. Indeed, these humans have done something no species before them has managed. They have made us laugh, not at suffering but with joy. Riley looked up at the impossible tears of ancient beings and smiled. So what happens now? Do we win? Do we get a trophy? Do we get to go home? Oh, James Riley of the Crucible world. Nixura's voice carried warm amusement. Now you understand so little of what you have accomplished. The arena began to shift again, but this time the changes were clearly beneficial. The nightmare creatures faded away, replaced by something that looked remarkably like a comfortable green room. Refreshments appeared, apparently tailored to human tastes, though Riley wasn't going to ask how they'd acquired that information. You see, Rexted explained, the gauntlet of final despair was never meant to be survived. It was meant to identify the inheritors, the species that would be worthy of what comes next. And what comes next? Dr. Park asked, though she was clearly more interested in the extremely advanced scanning equipment that had materialized nearby. War, Nixura said simply. The greatest war the galaxy has ever seen. A war that will determine whether intelligence, creativity, and joy will survive in this universe, or whether it will all fall to the darkness that even now spreads between the stars. Riley felt that familiar cold sensation in his stomach. Let me guess. You need warriors. No, James Riley. We have had warriors for millions of years. Warriors break, warriors fall, warriors despair. The ancient beings began to materialize on the arena floor, not as impossible, distant entities, but as individuals. They were still beyond human comprehension, but now they seemed approachable. We need something much rarer, Verfaxathal continued, taking a form that was roughly humanoid but composed of what looked like crystallized time. We need a species that can fight without losing hope, that can face horror without losing humor, that can wage war without losing their humanity. And you think that's us? Torres asked. We know it is, Nexorara replied, her form shifting between states of matter like a living aurora. Because you have just accomplished something that 12 million years of trials told us was impossible. You turned our test of despair into a celebration of life. Rodriguez looked around at his crewmates, then back at the assembled ancients. So what exactly are we signing up for here? The survival of everything that matters, Rexthal said simply. And the chance to ensure that the universe remains a place where beings can still laugh together. Riley considered this for a long moment. Around him, his crew waited for his decision, not just as their captain but as their representative to powers beyond their understanding. Well, he said finally. We were getting bored with just exploring anyway. The laughter that erupted from the assembled ancients shook the stars themselves. But even as they laughed, even as they began to plan for the war to come, none of them noticed the darkness that was already spreading across the outer rim of the galaxy. A darkness that had heard their laughter and was coming to see what could possibly be amusing enough to catch the attention of beings who had watched civilizations rise and fall like seasons. The real test was about to begin. 6 months later, the war had come to them. The outer rim burned with fires that could be seen from 100 systems away. Ancient civilizations that had endured for millions of years winked out like candles in a hurricane. And at the edge of known space, something vast and hungry and utterly without humor continued its inexorable advance toward the core worlds. The UES Defiance hung in space above Kethmoran Prime, but she was no longer alone. Around her, a fleet of impossible ships flew in formation, vessels built by the ancients using principles that human engineers were still struggling to understand, crewed by the strangest alliance the galaxy had ever seen. Captain Riley stood on the bridge of his transformed ship, watching the tactical display that showed the approaching darkness. The enemy, if it could even be called that, didn't show up on conventional sensors. It was less an invasion than an absence. Systems simply ceased to communicate. Stars dimmed and went dark, and the very concept of existence seemed to drain away like water through a broken dam. How long until they reach the Nexus worlds? He asked. The Dr. Park, now serving as the fleet's xenobiologist and psychological warfare specialist, checked her instruments. 47 hours, assuming they maintain current rate of advancement. But Captain, she paused, her expression troubled. I don't think advancement is the right word, it's more like expansion, like a stain spreading across reality itself. The bridge crew had changed since their first encounter with the ancients. They were still human, still prone to inappropriate humor in the face of cosmic horror, but now they understood the weight they carried. They weren't just fighting for Earth, or even for humanity. They were fighting for the right of intelligence itself to exist in a universe that had room for laughter. Status report from the amphitheater fleets? Riley asked. Torres looked up from his expanded communications array, now capable of reaching across dimensions. All 12 battle groups report ready, sir. The Veltaxis crystal ships have integrated their harmonic weapons with our comedy broadcasts. The Mercanti dimensional dancers are standing by to confuse enemy targeting systems. And he paused, checking his notes. The Guardians of the Last Laugh report that their morale weaponry is fully operational. Riley nodded. In the months since their trial on Kethmoran Prime, the ancient beings had revealed the full scope of what they faced. The enemy wasn't an alien invasion or a conventional war, it was entropy itself, given consciousness and purpose. It sought not to conquer the galaxy but to render it meaningless, to drain away everything that made existence worth having. Joy, hope, the ability to find humor in tragedy. The ancients had fought this enemy before in wars that stretched across geological ages. They had won through superior technology, overwhelming force, and tactical brilliance. But each victory had cost them something essential, until eventually they had become so focused on survival that they had forgotten why survival mattered. That was when they had built the arena of last resort. Not as a test of strength or intelligence, but as a search for something they had lost. The ability to laugh in the face of the impossible. Incoming transmission from Admiral Quinthara, Torres announced. The Veltaxis admiral appeared on screen, her crystalline features now showing signs of strain. Behind her, Riley could see the bridge of the Harmony of Spheres, one of the Confederation's most advanced vessels. It looked like it had been through hell, which, considering their recent engagements with the enemy, was probably accurate. Captain Riley, she began, her voice carrying harmonics of exhaustion and determination. The enemy has broken through our forward defenses at the Kythera Nebula. They're moving faster than our projections indicated. How much faster? Fast enough that we need to implement Operation Punchline ahead of schedule. Riley felt his stomach drop. Operation Punchline was their last resort. A battle plan so audacious, so fundamentally insane that it had actually made the ancient beings nervous. It involved turning the entire war into a massive, galaxy-spanning comedy routine, using humor as both weapon and shield against an enemy that literally could not understand the concept of finding meaning in meaninglessness. Admiral, are you sure? The calculations showed we needed at least another week. Captain? Quinthara interrupted. And for the first time since he'd known her, she sounded almost human in her desperation. They've taken the Cradle Worlds, the birthplace of 17 different civilizations. They're just gone. Not destroyed. Worse than destroyed. Forgotten, as if they never existed at all. The bridge fell silent. The Cradle Worlds were more than just planets. They were symbols, proof that life could flourish and create beauty in an indifferent universe. If the enemy could erase them so completely that they were forgotten rather than mourned. Understood, Admiral. All ships prepare for Operation Punchline. May whatever gods are still listening forgive us for what we're about to do. The next few hours passed in a blur of impossible preparations. Ancient beings, who hadn't moved in millennia, began to stir from their eternal contemplations. Weapons that had been theoretical concepts became terrible realities. And throughout the fleet, beings from 100 different worlds prepared to stake everything on the most ridiculous military strategy in galactic history. The plan was simple in its audacity. They would meet the enemy not with conventional warfare, but with a celebration. A party so epic, so joyous, so fundamentally life-affirming that it would serve as a beacon of meaning in the face of entropy itself. It was, Rodriguez had observed while helping to install the necessary equipment, Either the most brilliant idea in military history or the most spectacular way to get everyone killed ever devised. Probably both, Riley had agreed. Now, as the enemy's influence spread like a shadow across their sensors, Riley looked out at his impossible fleet and felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Doubt. Having second thoughts, James Riley? Riley turned to see Vrexthal materialize on his bridge. The ancient being had taken to appearing in person during critical moments, his form now somehow more solid than it had been in the arena. Just wondering if we're about to save the galaxy or become the punchline to the universe's worst joke. Perhaps both, Vrexthal replied, echoing Rodriguez's earlier assessment. But is that not what makes it perfect? The greatest comedy often walks the razor's edge between triumph and disaster. Contact! Therese called out suddenly. I'm reading massive spatial distortions at the edge of the system. Whatever they are, they're big. The main view screen flickered and then focused on the source of the disturbance. What they saw defied description. Not because it was alien, but because it was the absence of description itself. A void in the shape of meaning, approaching with the inevitability of tomorrow. All ships, Riley commanded, his voice carrying across the fleet's communication network, initiate Operation Punchline. Ladies, gentlemen, and beings whose gender concepts exist in dimensions we can't pronounce, let's throw the biggest party this galaxy has ever seen. What happened next would be remembered by those who survived to remember as the Battle of the Last Laugh. The fleet moved into formation, but not a military formation. Instead, they arranged themselves in a vast amphitheater in space, with the ancient arena ships at the center and the others arrayed around them like the audience at the greatest show ever performed. As the enemy approached, the humans began their routine. Ladies and gentlemen, Riley announced, his voice being broadcast across subspace to every inhabited system in the galaxy. Welcome to the end of Everything Comedy Hour. Tonight's topic: why universal entropy is having an identity crisis. Dr. Park took the metaphorical stage next. Her scientific analysis transformed into a stand-up routine that somehow made the approaching apocalypse seem absurd rather than terrifying. So I was analyzing the enemy's psychological profile and I discovered something interesting. They're not actually trying to destroy the universe. They're just really, really bad at interior decorating. The effect was immediate and impossible. The approaching void hesitated. For the first time since its campaign began, the enemy encountered something it couldn't process. Beings who were laughing at it. Rodriguez followed up with engineering humor that somehow made faster-than-light travel seem like a cosmic pratfall. Torres turned military communications into a masterpiece of comedic timing, and throughout the fleet, beings from 100 different worlds added their own voices to the chorus of laughter. The enemy's advance slowed, then stopped. "It's working," Nexura's voice carried wonder across the mental link she shared with the humans. They cannot drain meaning from something that creates meaning through joy. But the enemy wasn't defeated, just confused. As Riley watched, the void began to pulse and shift, like a predator trying to understand prey that refused to act like prey. "I see it too," Riley called out. Time for the audience participation portion of our show. This was the truly insane part of the plan. Every ship in the fleet began broadcasting comedy routines directly at the enemy. Not as weapons, but as invitations. They were trying to teach entropy itself how to laugh. For a moment that stretched across eternity, the universe held its breath. Then impossibly the void began to giggle, not malevolent laughter, not mocking laughter. Tentative, confused, but genuine amusement at the sheer audacity of what it was experiencing. I'd never considered. The enemy's voice, when it finally spoke, was like the sound of stars being born. In all my eons of existence, I never thought to ask, what if meaninglessness itself could be meaningful? Riley felt his knees go weak. They had done it. They had actually done it. They had taught the embodiment of cosmic despair how to find humor in its own existence. "Welcome to the club," he said quietly. "Population, everyone who's ever looked at an impossible situation and decided to laugh instead of cry." The void began to take shape, not a form that made sense to human perception, but something that suggested vast intelligence reconsidering its most fundamental assumptions. "I have unmade so much," it said sadly. "So many worlds, so many civilizations. I thought I was fulfilling my purpose, bringing the universe to its inevitable end. Dr. Park, her scientific mind already working on the implications, stepped forward. But what if ending things isn't your purpose? What if you're supposed to be the setup for the universe's greatest joke? The punchline being, the entity asked. Rickstol materialized in the space between the fleet and the former enemy, his ancient voice carrying warmth that hadn't been heard in eons. The punchline is that endings aren't really endings. They're just beginnings in disguise. What followed was the most surreal diplomatic negotiation in galactic history. The entity that had nearly destroyed the universe agreed to help rebuild what it had unmade, but with a twist. Everything would be rebuilt with a sense of humor. Civilizations that had been marked by tragedy would be given the gift of finding joy in their own stories. Stars that had dimmed would shine brighter with the light of cosmic comedy. As the impossible fleet began to disperse, their mission accomplished in a way none of them had dared to hope, Riley stood on his bridge and looked out at a universe that had just learned to laugh at itself. "Captain," Tor said quietly, "what do we do now?" Riley considered the question. They had saved the galaxy through the power of comedy. They had turned the universe's greatest threat into its newest comedian. They had proven that intelligence, creativity, and joy could survive anything, even the end of everything. "Now," he said with a smile that carried the warmth of victory and the promise of new adventures, "we go home and write the after-action report. I can't wait to see how Command tries to classify this one." The laughter that erupted from his crew was picked up by the ship's communication array and broadcast across the galaxy, where it was heard by billions of beings who had just learned that the universe was a place where even entropy could learn to appreciate a good joke. And in the ancient amphitheaters of Keth Morin Prime, beings who had watched the rise and fall of civilizations for millions of years began to plan the greatest comedy festival the galaxy had ever seen. After all, they had a lot to celebrate. The universe had just discovered its sense of humor.